Okay, time for another video, and this one is going to be on a little app called BgInfo. And it basically runs on just about any Windows environment, probably back to Windows 2000, Windows XP. It runs on everything between that and Windows 10, and it also runs on Windows Server. And what BgInfo does is it basically will create a background on the computer that includes vital information for either the end user to see or for the support staff to see when they're maybe doing a remote desktop session or a phone session and they need to ask some basic questions and get the answers to some basic questions quickly, easily, and without having to navigate through a lot of menus and settings to try to find out that information. So this comes in really, really handy for help desk technicians, for system administrators that need certain data, quickly and easily, such as the host name or the IP address. Pretty much anything you can think of related to that particular system can be put into the background image, as you see here in my Windows 10 virtual machine here. I've got it set up even with a sort of a fake company name logo here. But these are just some of the basic things that you can set up with BgInfo to be displayed. And the other cool thing too is that you can do this for all users of that particular machine. If you're running terminal services, you can set it up for all of the desktops that are being presented in a terminal server. And the importance of this, I just don't think can be overstated enough, as far as being able to quickly grab an IP address of a machine or quickly grab a MAC address of a machine from the end user, being able to tell you that without trying to explain to them how to go in and view the IP address of the machine that they're on, or tell you the host name of the computer that they're on. If you name your machines with some sort of identifiable tag on them, like for example the Dell service tag, if you name your computers based off of the service tag and then some sort of other identifier that's or something specific to the organization or the department that they're in. But if it's based on or includes the service tag, then that makes it pretty easy to find, and make sure that you're actually dealing with the physical machine that you think you're dealing with. And so you would have the tag on the machine, the host name would be based on that tag, and it helps to keep everything sort of tied together. And when you're looking in Active Directory and stuff like that, what actual machine that you're dealing with, in both hardware and software. So if they're unable to generate a remote desktop session or something like that for you to get in their machine, then this information would really come in handy to have. What's the IP address? What's the host name? What operating system are you running? And the list sort of goes on and on. You could have, I guess 15 or 20 more items stacked up on top of this if you wanted to. But at some point it gets a little crazy. If you include every single piece of information, I think at some point it becomes a little, some of it might be redundant, and then some of it might be just overkill. Like you probably don't need to know certain things. But BgInfo, we'll go ahead and get into that program real quick. BgInfo, I'll provide a link to the download, is a very small, simple program. And when you first download it, let's see, let's go to my downloads here. When you download BgInfo, it comes with BgInfo, BgInfo 64, and then the end user license agreement. And so if you double click on BgInfo, you're presented with the interface here, and you can see the fields that are available on the right hand side. So there's quite a few things that you can include, and you basically just click on whatever you want to add, and like IE version, and we'll just add that. And there you go. You can adjust the size of these fields. You can adjust the color. You see a few of them I've got in yellow instead of white. You can adjust the layout, and you can even include, like I mentioned earlier, you can even include a company logo or something like that. You can have this program use the existing background on the computer, or you can specify your own image that you want to use as the background, which would overwrite, you know, the user's background that they have. I find it best to try to use something like a default background or something like that, sort of like, you know, this Windows background that we see. I think it really, and especially even having the company logo there too, I feel like it really enforces or drives the point home that this is company property. This is not a personal computer, and this is designed for someone to do their job and be productive throughout the day. And you know, I think it just sort of reinforces that that idea that, you know, this is not your computer. This is the organization's computer, and things are, you know, monitored, and things are you know, managed in a different location. So the other thing too is if you try to use the existing background, you know, whatever the user may have already set on their desktop, you know, if that's a picture or something like that, then a lot of this information, you know, you're not really going to know what color would need to be used with that particular background. Okay, so it may not be legible if the background that exists is already, you know, a really light color in that area, and then you've got white text on top of a light colored background. It would be almost impossible to read. So if you're deploying this large scale, I do think it's a good idea to stick with a, you know, fairly stock background, or maybe maybe your company has a background that they already use, that they already push out to all the computers, and it's got maybe a little bit of branding on it. And if it does, then you probably wouldn't need to include, you know, the company logo on a company logo background. So totally up to you though how you customize this. You can change the position. You can define the desktops that it's applied to, that sort of thing. But basically what happens when you get this, you know, configured the way that you want it to, oh, and the preview button is really handy, because you can click preview and it'll basically generate the background and change the background so that you can see it before you save the file, and you can make your changes and that type of thing. So when you get it set up the way that you think you want it, you can click File, Save As, and you know, save it wherever you want it to be saved. And I happen to save both the configuration file and the program, the exe file. I saved them just on the root of the drive. So, you know, c:/BgInfo64.exe and c:/ whatever file name .bgi that you save this file as. All right, so I'll show you that real quick. Let's go here. And so there's my BgInfo 64 program. And then here's the BGI file that that has my settings that I have configured saved to it. All right. That's another thing too, is the extension of the background info files are .bgi. All right. So you can put the program and the configuration file really wherever you want. There's probably more appropriate places to put this. I prefer to keep them together, but there is probably a more appropriate place than the root of the C drive to do this. But I just put them here for ease of demonstration and showing the task scheduler and stuff like that. All right, so like I said, if you double click the BgInfo 64, you get the nice little GUI program here where you can open an existing configuration file and modify it, or you can start over with a whole new one. And basically what you're doing with this program is generating the BGI file that you're going to need in order for the BgInfo program to read from. All right, so we'll go ahead and quit that. I don't want to save those changes. And once you have your BGI file ready to go, you could go ahead and deploy that with a GPO or login script, however you want to do it. There's multiple ways of deploying this and setting this up. There's sort of like the sky is the limit as far as how you could set this up. I'll show you how I've set it up on this Windows 10 test virtual machine, just to give you an idea of, if you wanted to deploy this as a login script that runs once, that's one way of doing it. I prefer, in addition to having it, run on startup, I prefer this to actually run every few minutes, maybe 1, 2, 3 minutes. And the reason that I think it's important for it to run more than just at login is because if you look at the free space here, that's something that could change. And if you look at the IP address, that's something that could change. So if you don't have up-to-date information on the background, then it becomes a little bit unreliable. And so one example would be loss of network connection, and the IP address is a 169 address. If the background is still showing, whatever the address was at login when everything was working, then that's not really going to lead you in the right direction. And same for DNS server. If somehow they were able to change the DNS server to something that it shouldn't be, and so they've got just random weird internet issues where they can maybe access things that are local, but they can't get out to the outside world. Those are just things that would be handy to have up-to-date information on. And free space, if you've downloaded a whole bunch of huge ISO files and now you're running out of space, and they've totally ignored the you're running low on space warnings, the free space showing what it was at logon doesn't really make a lot of sense. So how you can keep this data up to date is create a task in the task scheduler. And I've done this manually, but this can be deployed through group policy, like I said. But basically what I've done is saved, like I said earlier, the BgInfo program and the config file just to the root of the C drive. And we'll take a look at the properties of this task that I've created. And I'm basically just running it as the users group. And I've got run with highest privileges here. And the trigger is at logon, and then it repeats every 2 minutes. Okay, you can change this to whatever you want. If you want ridiculous lengths of time between running it, or if you want it every 1 or 2 minutes, it's up to you. So basically, once the user logs on, and this is for any user, you see I have any user specified here. Once the user logs on, it's going to run, and then it's going to run every 2 minutes after that. All right. So if there is a loss of network connectivity and the IP address that's, it's specified DHCP, and it no longer has an IP address from the DHCP server and it self-assigns one, within 2 minutes, the background is going to show that 169 address. All right. Make sure it's enabled here so you can see my settings there. And then for the action, we just have start a program. And the program's located, C:/BgInfo64.exe. And then the arguments are the location of the BGI file. That's what comes first. And then the switches that I have are silent, no LIC prompt, and then timer 0. All right. So those 3 switches are, things that need to be specified because you don't really want the script to run every minute or 2 and have some sort of pop-up on the screen, saying, hey, this is going to happen in this many seconds. Or, do you accept this? That's what the no LIC prompt gets rid of. And then silent quiets some other things that the BgInfo program will do every time it runs. So by having these 3 switches defined, it basically becomes totally silent to the end user. They won't even see any pop-ups or anything. The only thing they're going to notice is that every few minutes the free space will change if they've downloaded something. But that's pretty much the only thing that should change. Would be in my situation with the stuff that I've got listed here, the only thing that should really change is the free space, unless there's, like I said, some sort of network loss and the lease from the DHCP server times out and I lose my IP address. That's really the only time that I would see a change. All right, so you can actually run this command put together in the command prompt if you want to test it out. If you want to try, well, what would happen if I ran silent and timer 0, but I left the no LIC prompt switch off, and you can test around with it to see what it would do with the different arguments. All right. I have noticed that you do need to specify the full path to the BGI file, even though the BgInfo64.exe and what I've called standard view.bgi, even though they're in the same folder, the BgInfo64.exe program wants the full path to the BGI file. And I've noticed that if I don't specify this part here, it doesn't work. It can't find the BGI file. All right, so it's pretty straightforward. And if you open a command prompt, and let's just do that real quick. If you go to CMD and C, so you can see here the things that I have on the C drive. Let me make sure I'm not hiding something over here. All right. So if I run BgInfo64.exe, you can see that it brings up the GUI. So we'll cancel that. And then I think I can run, what is it, help maybe? No. Let's try. All right, so the prompt here is showing us the options that we have and what those options do. There's more switches that you can include, other than the ones that I've shown in my arguments for my task scheduler, but that's just what works for this particular situation. And the arguments that I have set up in the task scheduler, I think would probably be what most people would use if they were trying to deploy this out to, a large number of users. You don't really want, even if you're running something only every 5 or 10 minutes or once an hour, you don't really want a pop-up, coming up on the screen that they have to click OK on, every time it runs. All right. So there's the example of what they're showing, and you can see the timer being 0 is the timeout period before applying the configuration. And if you don't do timer 0, I think there's a pop-up that says, this many seconds it's going to be applied. You can do some other things too, like write to a log, and you can specify the path to the log, which may come in handy for troubleshooting. But anyway, there's a lot more to the command that you can add if you need it. All right, so we'll hit cancel there, and the conditions I've just got pretty much all the time this needs to run, and stop it if it runs more than an hour. This should only take maybe a couple seconds to run. So if it runs for an hour, then yes, it definitely needs to stop. All right, and so that's pretty much it for the task being scheduled. And once you set this up, and it's a task on your task scheduler, once you sign in, it's going to start running however often that you specified. You see my schedule here is to run every 2 minutes. So what we can do is to test this out. I've actually got a big ISO here that we can copy, and we'll duplicate it. And we should see the free space is 35.16 available. So what should happen is the next time that the task runs, we'll see an update here that should match what our Explorer tells us right here. And we're actually down to 33.1. Okay, so you can see there's a discrepancy right now. The background is saying 35.16. Our actual free now is 33.1, now that I've taken up a little bit more space. And depending on where we are in the 2-minute cycle, this could take 1:59 to run, or it could just be 5 seconds away. I'm not exactly sure where we are on that. But to speed things along, I'm going to just manually click the run button down here, which is basically the same as if it had been 2 minutes since the last run and it was running again. So if I click run here to go ahead and force the task to run, we will see that the background now has been updated to show the correct 33 point. Well, it's kind of funny. This says 33.2 and this says 33.1. I'm assuming that this is 33.19 or 18, and it's just rounding up to 33.2 here, but close enough. We'll let that one slide. So the way that I want to get into a little bit more of how you would deploy this in an environment and what your options are if you're going to use GPO. A lot of times what we do when we're running a script or a program, an executable, is we will store that on a network drive, and any config files or support files or resources that go with that will also be maybe in the same folder on a network drive that's accessible to everybody. That makes a lot of sense to do it that way, because you basically put the program and any config files in one location, and all of the computers that are, that need that resource can look in one spot for it. All right. That makes sense. However, given the nature of what this program does, and how, if we're using this as more of a diagnostic approach here, um, if there is a network issue that causes the IP address to, be off, or the DNS server's not working or whatever, then when the background program tries to run, or if the task tries to run and it's looking on the network for BgInfo.exe and standardview.bgi, if those things don't exist, then the background isn't actually going to be updated. And it may not include any information at all if there's a problem, at the first logon. If from the very beginning there's a network issue, then all this data is not going to show up. It's just not going to work if it's trying to, pull this from a network location. So with that being said, how you can get around that is, in your GPO, you can actually copy the or script, whatever you want to do. You can actually copy it from the network share onto the local machine, and just put it wherever you want, that's accessible via all the users. The good thing about doing that is it will run as long as the computer is working. If there's no network access, it doesn't matter. If it's already been copied to the machine and the task can be run via the scheduler, regardless of what's going on with the network. So those are things to think about. One con of copying the program and the config file, one con is, if you change the layout of the BGI file and you want to include something else, or you just manipulate it for whatever reason, then you would have to, make sure that the BGI file gets, sent to everyone that's supposed to get it. Again, you could do that via GPO or, script, whatever. But those are just some things to think about, that if you have it on a network share, you would really only have to copy or replace, the BGI file in one spot, or wherever the network shares would actually be. So there's pros and cons of doing it, both ways, but I prefer, like I said, given the nature of what this does and the importance of having it available, I think it's not a big deal. We're not talking about like a giant, file here. This is just a few megs for the program and the BGI file. I don't think it's too big of a deal to, copy these things to the local machine. That way they can run regardless of the network situation. I have known about BgInfo for a long time. I remember seeing it a long time ago for the very first time. I was in a hospital walking down the hall, and one of the little computers, the little workstations for the nurses or whatever, was signed in. And I remember walking by and seeing this information on the background. And I remember the first time that I saw that, because I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. That, I wonder how they did that. And I immediately could see how it would come in handy, and the importance of having that data, fairly readily available, for support calls, support tickets, whatever. If you can put in policy, to open a ticket, you must include the computer name or the host name, that we're talking about here, or include this, and this, this data. I also could see how important it would be for remote desktop sessions if someone's going to troubleshoot that particular machine and it's not a terminal services setup. But if you're going to troubleshoot that machine, um, just double checking that you're on the right one. If you can check the host name and go, yes, this is the computer, this is who's calling me. The other thing too is the username, which would show the user the login of the currently signed in user. So if you join a session with someone that's on the phone and you know what their name is, you can actually make sure that you're logged into the right computer and you're not taking over someone else that has no idea what's going on, and they think they're getting hijacked or something. Um, it just I think that, yes, you can get an IP address, fairly easily by, going into the network settings or, CMD and then ipconfig. I can't tell you how many times in my early career that I walked people through those exact steps over the phone. And I also can't tell you how many times um, it was just like I wanted to bang my head up against the wall because all we needed to do was CMD and then IP config so that we could get the IP address of the machine. And some people have no problem with that. They know sort of what they're doing and they can follow instructions. And then some people, and if you've ever worked a help desk or if you've ever worked support, IT support, you know what I'm saying. Some people just have no computer skills whatsoever, and even typing in CMD, it just blows their mind. And especially when they get the command prompt loaded, finally they see the black square and where they're going to type something, and it freaks them out, and they're uncomfortable with it and they don't want anything to do with it, and they're afraid they're going to break something. So having that information right on the background where and think if you're if you're a large organization that has hundreds or thousands of desktops, and you've got a large help desk and you've got support tickets coming in all the time, you've got support calls coming in all the time, if your agents have multiple remote desktop sessions open at once, which is very common, having this information available quickly and easily and up to date, and reliable, because now you're not having to tell the person to try to find a tag on the machine or a service code on the machine. It's just there it is, it's up to date, and it's easily accessible. And speaking of tags on the machine, Dell, for whatever reason, in their infinite wisdom, they have the service tag code, and then there's some sort of support code that's also a number that's about the same amount of characters as the service tag. So you have to be really careful when you ask people to look at the service tag on the machine, because it's the same label. It says service tag is this, and then on the same sticker, there's another code, and so sometimes they'll try to give you that support code instead of the real service tag, and that could cause issues. I don't know why they did that. They should have changed the color or something, I don't know, so that you could say it's the red number. I need the red number. But anyway, like I said, this is totally customizable, and sort of the sky is the limit as far as what you want to include or how stripped down you want this to be. You could really narrow this down to just free space and just the host name and just the IP address if that's what you wanted to do. You could change these colors to whatever you want. I happen to think that the boot time, that may or may not be important. It just depends. CPU probably isn't going to matter ever, but it might be nice to know if you just want to quickly go, oh yeah, that's a 3.2 gigahertz, and since this is a VM, it's saying unknown family, unknown family 6 model 3C, whatever that is. The free space, I think, is kind of a big a big one to have, because a lot of people don't really pay attention to, pop-ups and warnings and stuff like that. They'll just download and download and download, and then the next thing you know, like, oh, the computer is not, it's not working. I'm getting weird, Microsoft Word errors. I can't save my file. I'm getting Firefox issues. Chrome's not working right. My computer's really slow. And it's just because they're totally out of space. And but when they send in the request for help, they're not going to mention anything about how, well, I've been getting some pop-ups saying that I'm running low on space. They're going to say Chrome is not working, or they're going to say I've restarted my computer and it's still really slow. Internet Explorer is not working, and Word is crashing. So you could potentially have an agent that's troubleshooting issues that have nothing to do with the actual root cause of all the problems, and it could just be that they're out of space. So especially as it seems like drive volumes and partitions are actually getting a little bit smaller. It could be pretty easy to fill up that volume fairly quickly, given the fact that ISOs, 4, 6, 8 gigs, Blu-ray images or Blu-ray downloads. I mean, who knows what they're downloading, but you could be looking at in just a half an hour, you could fill up a whole drive depending on the size of it, with the network connections and the ISP, the bandwidth that's available now. You can fill stuff up pretty quickly, and for users that are not in the know, I think they could do that without really even realizing what they're doing. And then obviously the host name, I think, is extremely important. The IP address. I have a funny story about this, actually. I had a user that was really worried, was really upset, actually, that the IP address of their machine was on their background. They thought it was an unsecure practice. They just really didn't like the fact that anyone could walk by and see the IP address of their machine. I don't know if they watched, like, too much Law and Order or whatever, where, oh, we have your IP address, we know everything about you. I don't know what made them think that it was a big deal and was this big insecure practice, but for whatever reason, they really did not want the IP address on the machine, and they just sort of started accusing the IT department of a lot of crazy thing, a lot of, like, tinfoil hat stuff was going on with this particular person. And so when the IP address showed up on the background, that sort of just blew the doors wide open as far as the conspiracy theories. DNS server, some people may or may not want the DNS server to show up there, as far as the support staff or IT department. I think it's sort of important, because if your firewall is blocking outside DNS servers, okay, so if you're forcing your users to use the internal DNS server, all right, for obvious security reasons, and I really recommend that you do set your network up that way, that the internal DNS server is the one that you will use. And if you try to use an outside DNS server, then those requests are blocked. Okay, so this showing the DNS server would really help if, for whatever reason, a user was able to manually change their DNS server from the internal one to something outside, and that's why their internet's not working. And gee, if I type in the IP address of a web server, I can get there, but if I just type in google.com, it doesn't work. A quick glance at the DNS server here would show whether they're using the internal one, or if they've somehow slipped in or some rogue program has tried to change the DNS server to something else. That's not going to work. MAC address, definitely. If you need to check the maybe you're doing DHCP reservations, or you want to check the traffic, and you're not sure what the IP address is, but you can get the MAC address quickly here. The MAC address would just be handy to have, I think. The amount of memory, kind of nice to know. Network speed, definitely, I think this is one that you want to have. And why I say network speed is important here is because we're talking about the reported speed of the link between the workstation and the networking switch. Okay, so it's not a speed test. It's not actually going to speedtest.net and doing a download and an upload and reporting, oh yeah, you're at a 300 meg download and a 300 meg upload. The networking speed here is talking about the link between the network interface on this workstation and the very first switch that it's talking to, all right, that it's connected to. So if a user is reporting just really slow internet, it works, but it's just sort of intermittent and it's really super slow. If you ask them, well, what is the reported networking speed on your computer? Just look at network speed and tell me what it says. If they say 10 MB, then you're going to know that there's some sort of problem between the negotiation of the link speed between the workstation and the switch, and you may have a networking card issue, or you may have an issue with the switch, or it could be a problem with the cable, and the negotiation is just so low that it's causing them to have working internet sort of, and really really slow network, a really really slow network connection. And so this right here could tip you off pretty much right away if you know that the switch is supposed to be gigabit and the reported networking speed is only 10, then that's a problem, and that would sort of point you in the right direction. Operating system version, that's just handy, especially in a mixed environment. If you've got maybe some Windows 7 still floating around, you've got Windows 10 in the mix, and you're dealing with some sort of issue, a lot of people, they don't know what operating system they're running. A lot of people don't even know that it's called Windows, believe it or not. They're just like, it's the computer. I don't know. It's a Dell. If you say, well, what operating system do you have? You could get a range of responses to, what operating system are you on? So having the OS version, I think, is really important. And there's another line you can put here that is for the service pack version. I think that's pretty much geared, for older versions of Windows that have service packs and stuff like that. But back in, like, think about Windows XP. Are you on XP? Are you on XP SP1, SP2, SP3? That could potentially be an important piece of information if you're trying to make sure that, let's say everyone has upgraded from SP2 to SP3. If anyone's reporting a problem or a weird crashes, and they say, well, I see SP1 on my background here, then you would know, okay, for some reason, we don't know how, but for some reason, this one's not on the latest version of Windows XP. It doesn't have the latest service pack. Username, I sort of touched on that, a little while ago, like just making sure that not only the host name is correct, but the user, that could be pretty important as well. If somehow they've gotten credentials to a different user, or if you see administrator here, that would be a major question of, why are you logged in as administrator? How did you get that password? How are you signing into the local administrator account? That would be sort of a major red flag if you saw anything other than the actual username of the person that was supposed to be signed into this computer. And then volumes, just seeing how much space they have could come in handy. If you're talking to them about downloading large files and they already have a small volume to begin with, then you may want to tell them, you can't download massively big files on this computer. Or you could give them a warning, you can download this many, but then you're going to start running out of space. Okay, so you need to be on the lookout. Having the volume size here and then comparing the free space to the actual volume size, it could just be a little clue, to you when you're dealing with someone on the other end of the phone or you're doing a training session, that type of thing. It's just something that at a quick glance saves a lot of time. And, even if it doesn't save a lot of time, for all of your help desk interactions, when you're talking about hundreds of people potentially calling in, every day, or, hundreds of support tickets coming in, every 30 seconds, minute, 2 minutes, that adds up over time. And especially in the business of IT support and trying to, just get in, get it figured out, and then get out. I think it's extremely important to be as efficient as possible as we can, and having this data available at a glance, I think is a huge win when you're talking about, providing the highest level of support that you can, and, reinforcing that this is a company owned computer. This is company property. This is not your personal computer. And you see our company logo right there on the desktop to remind you that, this is not yours. This is ours. This is a managed device. I think that a lot of people that have used BgInfo have probably loved it once they've, taught their support staff how to use it, and they've trained the end users how to, look at this data. And if they're, phoning in or whatever, they know that the host name is right there. And training them to not be scared of that data is important. And one thing that I know that I've run into is the people that get upset that it's there and covering their background, and, oh, it's too ugly, and do I really have to have this text on my screen all the time? You get all kinds of like crazy things that you just never really would assume would be a big problem. When you deal with enough people on a large scale, if you've got 12,000 users, you're gonna have just people complain, and you're gonna have people that think it's cool, and you're gonna have people that go, "Oh, I didn't know you could do that. That's kind of neat. I like the logo being on there, and I like being able to see an up-to-date, free space calculation to just to remind me this is how much I have." Or the boot time, to be like, "Oh, I haven't rebooted in a few days. I probably need to go ahead and do that." So it's so interesting to see how different people have a different take on it. And some people really like it. Some people don't even notice. And some people, they can cause, a bit of a negative reaction to it, if you will. But I think that's pretty much it. BgInfo, if you've used it, I'm sure you love it. And if you haven't used it, I encourage you to, figure out a way that you can try it out on your machine. And it does work on Windows 10. This is the latest version of Windows 10. And you see it runs fine. It's been around for a long time, but they've got a 64-bit version, and it seems to run just fine on Windows 10. So anyway, I think that's pretty much it for BgInfo. Thanks for watching.